Back in June of 2016, the GTX 1070 was released, and it was a significant improvement from its predecessor, the 970. It had 8 gigs of DDR5, a base clock of 1506 MHz and a boost clock to 1683, and a memory clock of 2002 MHz. It has a TDP of 150 watts, and the suggested power supply recommendations was 450 watts, but honestly, 500 watts if you were going to overclock it was ideal. Now this variation is the Zotac Mini. It has a DVI, display ports, and HDMI. It's powered by one 8-pin connector, has 2 cooling fans, nice heatsink, and a very nice clean look to it. I definitely like this black and silver look. MSRP at release was $379, which is interesting because years later with the GPU craze, these things are selling anywhere from a minimum of $330 to $400. Now recently, I have found this graphics card has been well sought after, with the prices going anywhere from lowest, if you're lucky, to $300 to $400. It is a great graphics card in the sense that it was way faster than its predecessor, but even 6 years later, this thing is capable of great 1080p performance and 1440p performance. So on my test bench, I'm running a 1050 Ti. I love the 1050 Ti, it's a great card, but when testing newer hardware or just trying to get an idea for some benchmarking, the 1050 Ti has its limitations. Fortunately, I was able to get my hands on one of these thanks to a viewer. I greatly appreciate you. And we have this lovely thing. Now, I've never owned a Zotac card, I will say that. I've never owned one, and I've really never messed with it. And the only reason why is just because I guess brand loyalty, or it just always stuck to Asus and EVGA. But I gotta say, the look of this Zotac is pretty nice. And looking at some of their newer cards, they got some nice looking cards. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna take this thing apart, fresh thermal paste, clean it up real good, make sure this thing is ready to run beautiful. Pop it in my test bench and play some games on it and see what kind of performance we get. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws. Alright, let's separate the cooler. Hopefully it's not anything too crazy or involved. Alright. I gotta say, disassembling these coolers does get nerve-wracking for the simple sense that, I mean, they like really get glued on there with that thermal paste. So, always be careful. Alright, let's take our power connector off. Our thermal paste is crusty and all dried up. So let's clean it up. Get our heat sink cleaned up really good. Now these thermal pads, leave them alone, don't mess with them. I rarely ever change them unless they break or they're just really squashed out where they're not making contact. I rarely change them. And I've never had an issue with older cards, just leaving them as is. Alright, it looks good. Now these fins are a little bent, so typically I just take a small screwdriver and we just kind of push them back out. Especially right over here. Be gentle because these things can break easily. Alright, that looks a lot better. So this thing's a little dusty and crusty, so we just kind of want to dust it off. I am going to take my blower and also blow the dust out of this. For thermal paste, just using Arctic MX5 because that's what I have. Just try to get it in the center. Let's plug in our connector. Let's get this thing attached. Alright, looks good. Fresh thermal paste, everything cleaned off. So let's plug this into a computer. So thankfully, another solid card, and very happy to have it on my test bench. Checking the thermal paste, cleaning it up, getting the dust off always makes a big difference. If you're going to test a card, or if you have an older card that you want to make sure that it's running the best it can, definitely check the thermal paste, definitely dust it, clean it very well, and you'll be surprised of how much performance you can regain just by doing some maintenance on it. It's not for the faint of heart sometimes, and some cards are a lot harder to take apart, but I definitely recommend trying to take apart your older cards and give them a fresh shot. So we played some games, and the games that we played: Battlefield 4, as you can see, 1440p. We were able to play an ultra preset. We were able to get 57 frames per second, occasional dips to the 41 frames per second, but still a playable experience. And if we were to lower the ultra preset to something lower, we could actually get closer to the 60 frames per second mark. Ashes of the Singularity, I like that game. It's fun, it's addicting, and I went ahead and played it at 1440p, went with the extreme preset, and I was able to get 90 frames per second. Occasionally some dips in the 80s, but 90 frames per second was pretty solid. So Fortnite, I know I didn't have the footage up there, got deleted somehow, but Fortnite I was able to play at 1080p epic settings, and I was actually able to get 80 frames per second, and the lowest dips I got was 70. Looked amazing, smooth, no hiccups, so pretty solid. And yes, we could bump it up to 1440p, but considering that game's a more competitive base, 1080p was the way to go. So then I went ahead and tried a newer game, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Currently playing that game and enjoying it a lot. So on that one, we went ahead and I tried it at 1080p, and I gave it ultra settings, and I was able to play 40 to 45 frames per second. So then what I did drop it down to was the medium preset, which gave me closer to 60 frames per second, and that was actually more playable experience in my opinion. So this 1070 still has some great value, and it's still a phenomenal card. Now, looking at some of the other cards that have come out that may be considered competition, you have the 6500 XT, which honestly is way slower than this. I mean, up to 45%. Now, I haven't done these tests myself because I don't have any of these cards. By doing my research, I was able to find out that this card is 45%, up to 45% faster than a 6500 XT. The other one would be the 3050, which it's 10% faster, but the 3050 does have newer technology, so it's a trade up on that sense. And even the 1660, which goes for like $400 to $500, scalped even higher, the 1070 still shows better performance on it. But the trade-off is, like I said, is that a lot of these cards have newer technologies that kind of get you a little more future-proof. But I gotta say, this is a solid card, and if I had to spend the money, this is the way I would go. I definitely recommend getting this card. Definitely keep out for them because there are people just unloading them real quick, and it has some great bang for the buck. So very happy to have this card on my test bench. Appreciate the viewer that sent it to me. So guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see what we come up with next.